There are scandals that explode like fireworks, lighting the sky for a moment before fading into nothing. And then there are scandals that never truly die. They whisper, they linger, they cling to the walls of history like a shadow that refuses to lift. Marilyn Monroe's final scandal belonged to the second kind. It was not loud, it was not chaotic, it was quieter, heavier, like a door slowly closing on a secret that Hollywood prayed would stay buried. In the final weeks of her life, Marilyn's world had become a labyrinth of unanswered calls, political pressure, and conversations that disappeared into locked rooms. The official reports described her death simply, probable suicide. But the people closest to her insisted that nothing about those last days was simple. Her phone records vanished. Witness statements changed. The timeline cracked open like fragile porcelain. The house in Brentwood, the last place she ever breathed, still holds the temperature of that August night in 1962. The dim yellow lamp, the half-open window, the phone clenched in her hand as if she had dialed a truth the world wasn't ready to hear. And around her, an industry built on illusion moved swiftly, almost too swiftly, to protect its image, its heroes, and its myths. How could the brightest icon of American cinema end her story in a room filled with silence and contradictions? And why does the truth remain locked behind doors that no one dares to open? Marilyn Monroe didn't just die with secrets. She died inside one. Before she became the woman whose final scandal would shake Hollywood to its core, Marilyn Monroe was simply Norma Jean, a girl born into instability, shaped by loneliness, and fueled by a hunger for belonging. Her childhood drifted through foster homes and uncertainty, and in those quiet corners of Los Angeles, she learned two things: how to survive and how to smile even when her heart trembled. It was a skill that would one day define her legend. When a wartime photographer discovered her at the age of 19, something extraordinary happened. The lens loved her, not because she was perfect, but because she was transparent. Every flicker of doubt, every spark of hope, every fragile dream glowed through her like light filtering through silk. Hollywood saw it immediately. They didn't just want her, they needed her. By the early 1950s, she was no longer Norma Jean. She was Marilyn Monroe, a name that rolled off the tongue like a promise, a fantasy, a spell. Film after film, the world watched her transform into the embodiment of desire and innocence, a contradiction so powerful it became her signature. Gentlemen prefer blondes, the 7-year itch, some like it hot. Each role sculpted her image into something almost divine. The theaters erupted with applause. Cameras flashed like lightning every time she appeared. Men adored her, women admired her, directors chased her. She was the dream America wanted to believe in, shimmering, soft, impossible to touch. But behind the lights, something else began to take shape. Exhaustion, insecurity, and a deepening sense that she was losing ownership of her own life. Every success came with a new demand. Every moment of glory carried a shadow. Because while the world saw a goddess, Marilyn felt the first quiet cracks forming beneath the surface. But behind the spotlight, another story, darker, sharper, was already being written. By the early 1960s, the sparkle that had once followed Marilyn Monroe like a loyal companion began to dim. Hollywood still wanted her, but not for who she was, only for who they needed her to be. And Marilyn, exhausted by a decade of being projected onto screens, magazines, and fantasies, quietly retreated into a world made smaller by fear, pressure, and secrets too heavy for one woman to hold. Her Brentwood home became a sanctuary, a fortress against the noise she once lived for. She decorated it with soft colors: cream walls, warm wooden floors, gentle sunlight, as if she were trying to build peace with her own hands. Neighbors sometimes saw her wandering the garden barefoot, her hair undone, her expression far away. She was still beautiful, but the beauty felt quieter now, gentler like a flame burning low. Professionally, she faced battles impossible to conceal. She was fired from Some Things Got to Give, her absences blamed on instability when, In truth, she was drowning in insomnia, anxiety, and a loneliness that no amount of fame could cure. Studios whispered, journalists speculated, friends worried, lovers drifted in and out, leaving more silence than comfort. But beneath the emotional strain lay something even more dangerous: the people she was growing close to, and the secrets she was beginning to carry. Her rumored connections with powerful political figures placed her in a web she never fully understood, a web from which there was no graceful escape. Phone calls came at odd hours. Visitors arrived discreetly. Conversations ended abruptly the moment someone else entered the room. Inside her home, the atmosphere changed. She began locking her doors more often, leaving lights on late into the night. She spoke of being watched, of being followed, of knowing things she shouldn't know. One friend recalled her whispering, "I feel like I'm being silenced, not ignored." And as summer approached, the house, once her refuge, felt less like a sanctuary and more like a witness. It was in this quiet, uneasy place that the final chapter of her life began to form, one shadow at a time. The night of August 4th, 1962 settled over Brentwood with an unsettling stillness, the kind of silence that feels deliberate, as if the world is holding its breath. Inside Marilyn Monroe's home, the lights glowed softly behind half-drawn curtains, casting warm shapes onto the walls. The air was thick with heat, the kind that clings to the skin and makes every sound feel heavier. And yet in that house, there was almost no sound at all. Marilyn spent the evening making phone calls, some warm, some strange, some abruptly cut short. Friends later said her voice drifted between calm and distant, as if she were present and slipping away at the same time. At around 10 p.m., she retreated to her bedroom. The lamp on her nightstand remained lit, its yellow glow spilling across her diary, the telephone, the small collection of pill bottles she kept too close to reach. Just after midnight, her housekeeper noticed that something was wrong. The light in Marilyn's room stayed on, unmoving. No footsteps, no voice, just that stubborn, motionless light. She knocked. No answer. She tried the handle, locked from the inside, the kind of lock that suggested not privacy, but finality. At 3:30 a.m., the door was forced open. Marilyn lay on her bed, face down, the phone still in her hand, as though she had been trying to reach someone in her final moments. The room felt strangely untouched, the window slightly open, the radio humming faintly in the hallway. Nothing dramatic, nothing chaotic, a scene too calm, too arranged, too silent. News traveled fast. By morning, her death became a headline, a tragedy wrapped in official language. Overdose, probable suicide. Hollywood mourned. Politicians distanced themselves. Reporters circled her home like vultures. But those closest to her felt something colder. The sense that the truth had been scooped out and replaced with a version the world was expected to accept. Why did the timeline shift with every retelling? Why did key details vanish into thin air? And why did the silence around her death feel heavier than the death itself? Because what ended that night was not just a life. It was a truth that never got to speak. 5. In the days that followed Marilyn Monroe's death, Hollywood moved with a kind of speed that felt less like grief and more like fear. Reporters crowded outside her Brentwood home, but inside government officials, studio representatives, and private investigators filtered through rooms with an urgency that didn't match the public narrative of a simple overdose. Something was being arranged, something was being protected, and something or someone was being erased. The first cracks in the official story appeared quickly. Phone records from the final 24 hours disappeared. Statements from witnesses shifted, softened, or contradicted each other. Even the timeline of when Marilyn was discovered seemed to change depending on who was speaking. Her housekeeper's testimony altered multiple times. The police arrived surprisingly late, and the scene of her death looked, to several medical professionals, strangely tidy, as if someone had curated the room before authorities entered. The phone still in her hand. Pill bottles placed neatly. No glass of water nearby, despite the number of pills she was said to have taken. It all felt too precise for a woman whose final months had been anything but. Rumors spread about missing journals. Notebooks Marilyn kept meticulously, filled with private thoughts, names, political anxieties, and details of relationships the public never fully understood. Friends claimed these diaries vanished within hours of her death. Others insisted they had been locked away, their contents too dangerous for the world to see. Meanwhile, her estate, officially valued at approximately $1.6 million, became a legal battlefield. Marilyn's will left the majority of her belongings and intellectual property to her acting mentor, Lee Strasberg. Not Hollywood, not studios, not politicians, not the people who benefited most from her image. Strasberg inherited everything: the dresses, the photographs, the letters, the diaries, the rights to her name and likeness, the very essence of Marilyn Monroe. And then, in a twist almost as tragic as her death, her legacy slipped into the hands of strangers. When Strasberg died, his widow, a woman Marilyn had never met, claimed legal control of Marilyn's image and quietly transformed it into a multi-million-dollar empire. Her face, her body, her voice, all became commodities sold in auctions, advertisements, and licensing deals. Pieces of her life scattered around the world like relics of a saint whose church had burned down. And the Brentwood home, the place where she died, was left to decay. Cracked tiles, faded paint, dust settling on the windowsills like a quiet accusation. Visitors would later describe a thick stillness inside, as if the walls themselves remembered more than they were allowed to say. The scandal didn't end with her death. It continued in the ambiguity, in the documents that vanished, in the voices that quieted, in the choices made by powerful men who had everything to lose if Marilyn Monroe ever told her final truth. In the end, the question wasn't who killed her, but who controlled the story after she was gone. Because in Hollywood, the most valuable inheritance isn't money, it's silence. 6. Time has a way of softening even the sharpest tragedies, but Marilyn Monroe's final scandal refuses to fade. It lingers, suspended between truth and myth, wrapped in the silence of those who benefited most from her absence. The world remembers her smile, her softness, her glow, but it is her unanswered questions that echo the loudest. In every biography, every documentary, every whispered conversation about that night in Brentwood, the same shadows return: the missing hours, the missing files, the missing words she never got to speak. Her life was built on light, pure, bright, intoxicating, but her ending was marked by a darkness that feels curated, as if carefully shaped by hands that feared what her truth might reveal. And yet, despite the layers of secrecy, despite the narratives rewritten to protect the powerful, Marilyn's legacy endures in a way no cover-up can erase. She remains not just a symbol of beauty, but a symbol of vulnerability, of survival, of a woman at war with a world that demanded everything from her. So what remains now? A scandal without closure, a truth without a voice, a star whose final act was taken from her and rewritten by others. But perhaps legacy is not the story they tried to hide, but the story she left behind in the hearts of those who saw the woman beneath the myth. Because in the end, the greatest truth is this: silence does not kill memory, it purifies it. And somewhere in the quiet of that Brentwood house, her echo still lives.